Okay, let's talk about a truly massive number. What does $338 billion injected into the U.S. economy actually look like? Especially when it comes, from just one group of companies.
Right. We're talking Tesla, SpaceX, xAI, and the like. Since 2021 alone, it's often called a turbocharger for the U.S. GDP.
A turbocharger, I like that.
Yeah, and that's the headline, isn't it? It really makes you want to dig deeper. So our mission today really is to unpack the data behind that huge economic power. We're looking at salaries, taxes, supply chain spending.
All the concrete stuff.
Exactly. But, and this is crucial, we also have to look at let's say, the foundations. There are billions in government support involved, and this really unique power that comes from social media influence, it all kind of props up the structure.
Right, so there's a tension there. The big number versus how it got so big. So we'll first tackle the scale of the economic boost, that $338 billion, make it feel real. Then we'll pivot. We'll look at the sources, the documents that detail the government funding, the subsidies.
The dependencies that might create.
Exactly. Okay, let's get into it. All right, segment one. Let's start with the hard cash. 2021 to 2025, we're adding up salaries, taxes, supplier spending. Yeah. That's how we get to that big headline number. So focusing just on jobs first, $110.7 billion in salaries. What does that actually, buy in terms of employment?
Well, it buys a massive workforce. We're talking over 200,000 employees in the U.S. alone. And critically, you have to look at the quality of those wages, not just the number of jobs. The sources point out, for instance, Tesla's average annual salary, it's sitting around $160,000.
Wow, okay. That's high.
It's huge purchasing power, yeah. And that money supports entire communities. It goes way beyond just the factory floor.
So that $110 billion, it sounds massive just on its own. But you mentioned an economic multiplier effect. What exactly is that? How does that turn a big number into something even more, epic for the economy?
Right. That's really the key analytic point here, the multiplier effect. It means that every dollar that gets generated from these high incomes, when those employees spend it on housing, groceries, local shops, whatever, it sets off a kind of chain reaction. Yeah. And that generates an additional $1.50, maybe even $2 in total economic value.
So that $110 billion in salaries is actually worth much, much more in terms of overall GDP impact.
Exactly. It ripples outwards. It's not just the initial paycheck.
And presumably, this spending flows back into public funds through taxes. What's the total tax picture look like?
It's significant. The total tax contribution comes out to $46 billion.
$46 billion.
Yeah. And what's fascinating is the breakdown. $31.8 billion of that is just employee income and payroll taxes.
Just from the employer.
Just from the employees. And the sources note, that figure alone, it's enough to fully fund NASA's budget. Twice over.
That puts it in perspective.
It really does. Then you add another $5.2 billion in corporate income tax, plus $9 billion in employer payroll taxes. I mean, the contribution to public services is pretty undeniable.
Okay, so they're paying employees well, contributing a lot in taxes, but they're also buying a lot of stuff within the U.S., right? Funding manufacturing through procurement.
Precisely. That's the next big chunk. Total spending on U.S. suppliers hit $182.2 billion. Yeah. And Tesla is really the engine here. They bought $166 billion worth of materials, things like batteries, chips, specialized steel.
Right.
And that strongly supports existing manufacturing hubs, in states like Michigan and Nevada.
Okay.
And even SpaceX, contributing about $7 billion to that procurement total. They stick really strictly to a Made in America policy for their critical stuff, like rocket-grade alloys and avionics.
So we can actually see this impact concentrated in specific places. You mentioned Texas earlier. What are some, concrete examples down there? In Austin, maybe?
Yeah, Austin's a great example. Giga Texas, their big factory there. It supported about $2.1 billion in total sales activity just in Travis County, just in 2022.
Just one county, 1 year.
Right. And it employs over 15,000 people, drawing those high-wage workers into the area. Then you go further south to Cameron County, where Starbase is.
Right, SpaceX's launch site.
Exactly. The infrastructure investment there is already over $3 billion. And locally, they've spent over $90 million with more than 80 Rio Grande Valley suppliers just since 2023.
Okay, so real money flowing into local businesses?
Definitely. And they're projecting tourism related to Starbase could add another almost $100 million in economic impact next year. For these specific regions, it really is transformative, no question.
Okay, so we've established this picture. A huge economic driver, billions flowing out in salaries, taxes, supplier contracts, transforming local areas.
Yeah, the booster effect is clear.
But now we need to look under the hood, like you said. Is the argument from critics that this $338 billion figure is?
Well, maybe a bit misleading because of the massive financial help from the government that got it started.
That is the core tension, yes.
Yeah.
This empire, it wasn't built in a total vacuum.
Mm.
The sources we looked at indicate it was built on really substantial government support. We're talking loans, subsidies, tax credits, adding up to at least $38 billion over the years.
$38 billion, that's a huge baseline number itself. And it wasn't just, like, seed money from way back when.
That's the interesting part. No, nearly 2/3 of that $38 billion, it was committed in just the last 5 years.
Really?
Yeah, and 2024 alone saw commitments of at least $6.3 billion. So in a way, the U.S. government has acted like a critical venture capitalist, especially at moments when maybe private markets were a bit nervous.
Okay, can you give us a couple of key examples? Times when government money was like a lifeline, really kept things afloat? Sure. The first really big one that stands out is the $465 million loan from the Department of Energy that Tesla got back in 2010.
Okay, I remember hearing about that.
The stakes were incredibly high then. We found quotes from a former high-level employee saying, pretty flatly, that Tesla would not have survived without that specific loan.
Wow.
Yeah. It allowed them to engineer the Model S, their breakout car, and also to buy the Fremont factory in California. That really paved the way for their IPO just 6 months later.
Okay, so that was absolutely critical early on. What's the second example? You mentioned something about regulatory credits. Sounds complicated.
It is a bit bizarre, yeah, but also incredibly crucial. Tesla has earned $11.4 billion just by selling regulatory credits.
Selling credits to who?
To other car companies, automakers who failed to meet the government's zero-emission vehicle standards. So effectively, competitors who were, polluting too much had to pay Tesla, who had credits to spare because they only make EVs.
So Tesla monetized being green, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. An analysis showed that without those credits, Tesla actually would have lost over $700 million in 2020.
Get out. Really?
Yeah. Which means those regulatory credits, they were the single biggest factor that allowed Tesla to report its first full year of profitability.
That's kind of mind-blowing. It wasn't just car sales.
Not entirely, no. Not for that crucial first profitable year.
So this leads to kind of cognitive dissonance, doesn't it? You have the government providing this absolutely essential seed funding and these unique credit mechanisms for a CEO who is arguably the world's most vocal opponent of subsidies.
It creates what the sources call the subsidy paradox. Right. Musk has publicly, very loudly, called for getting rid of things like the consumer EV tax credit. He argues Tesla doesn't need the incentive anymore.
Yeah.
Yet his companies have been just enormous beneficiaries of federal and state support throughout their entire existence. It led one competitor to say, quite sharply, that Musk's real superpower is getting government money.
That's quite a quote. It highlights that tension perfectly.
Huh.
Okay, so that tension, private ambition fueled by public money, that leads us straight into the national security angle, doesn't it?
Well,
because when we look at that big $38 billion government funding figure, most of it actually comes from SpaceX contracts, right? NASA, Department of Defense.
that's right. NASA and the DoD are the major players there. NASA alone has invested over $15 billion in SpaceX over the years.
$15 billion just from NASA.
Yeah. And it wasn't just, paying for launch services as a customer. They really incubated the company in the early days. Congressional investigations confirm this. NASA nurtured SpaceX early on, starting with contracts like $278 million back in 2006.
Okay.
And they tolerated significant risk. They kept funding SpaceX with massive contracts, even when the company was repeatedly missing key milestone deadlines, sometimes by up to 2 years.
So the government wasn't just a customer. It was a very patient, very dedicated patron in those early years.
Absolutely. Patron's a good word for it.
But now, that early period seems over. Now, SpaceX is described in some reports as irreplaceable as a national asset. That sounds less like a patron-client relationship and more like dependence.
Mm-hmm.
Has the U.S. gone from patron to dependent?
I think in terms of strategic capability, national capability, that's exactly the situation we're in now. The dominance metrics are just staggering.
Like what?
Okay, get this. SpaceX did 134 orbital launches in 2024. That accounted for 83% of all spacecraft launched globally that year. 83%.
Wow. Okay.
And Starlink, their satellite internet constellation, it now makes up 65% of all operational satellites currently in orbit around Earth.
65%.
Yeah. So if you're the U.S. government and you need to launch sensitive national security payloads or you need reliable satellite communications, you really only have one viable domestic option for heavy lift and large constellations. It's just one private company.
Which raises a huge question, obviously, about the risks involved in relying so heavily on one company controlled by one person. What happens if national interests and the interests or decisions of that one individual clash?
And we've actually seen that risk play out, haven't we, with Starlink during the conflict in Ukraine?
Right.
The sources we reviewed cite experts expressing serious concern about this concentration of power. And the specific example they use is when Musk reportedly refused a Ukrainian request to activate Starlink service for a specific military operation near Crimea.
Why? What was his reasoning?
Because he personally believed, according to reports, that enabling that attack could escalate the conflict and potentially start World War III.
So his personal geopolitical assessment directly impacted military options on the ground.
Exactly. It highlights this really stark conflict. A private individual's judgment call, possibly based on incomplete information or personal beliefs, carrying immediate, profound national security consequences for the U.S. and its allies. It shows the potential downside of this dependency.
That shift from talking about huge infrastructure and government contracts to one person's decision affecting a war, it brings us perfectly to the final, maybe the most unique pillar of this whole empire's power, the influence of a single person's social media feed.
Yeah, the Musk effect.
Exactly. Research actually confirms that his activity on X, formerly Twitter, it significantly moves markets, stocks, cryptocurrencies, often triggering almost instant herding behavior among investors.
The data points are really quite dramatic, and they're measurable using a financial metric called cumulative abnormal returns, or CRR.
Okay, break that down quickly. What's CR?
Basically, CRR measures how much a stock price moves above and beyond what the overall market is doing at that time. So it isolates the impact of a specific event, like a tweet, filtering out general market noise.
Got it. So it shows the tweet's direct impact. Give us the numbers on that whole GameStop frenzy you tweeted about.
Right, the GameStonk tweet. Okay, so that single word plus the exclamation points generated a massive CR of 127.8% within the first 5 minutes of him tweeting it.
127%. In 5 minutes.
Yep. And it kept going, accelerating up to 141.43% within 2 hours.
That's just wild. An enormous isolated market spike, driven by what, 10 characters in a meme?
Pretty much. And we see this kind of dual impact, positive and negative, really clearly with Bitcoin too.
Okay, how dramatic were the swings there, based on what he said or did?
Well, on the positive side, when he simply added the hashtag Bitcoin to his Twitter bio, that action alone resulted in an 18.06% CAR surge for Bitcoin within the first 5 minutes.
Just adding the hashtag.
Just the hashtag. Conversely, later on, he made a negative comment about cryptocurrency's energy consumption. That caused an immediate CR drop of negative 9.86%. And that deepened to negative 15.02% 2 hours later. So yeah, hashtag, a comment, it can instantly create or erase millions, maybe billions in market value.
What's really fascinating, though, is the nuance the researchers found about sentiment. Like, it's not always straightforward what's positive or negative, especially for an algorithm.
Exactly right. They found that the automated, computational sentiment analysis tools, they often fail to capture the actual human interpretation of his tweets.
Can you give an example?
Sure. The classic one is his tweet saying, "Tesla stock price is too high IMO."
Right, I remember that one.
Computationally, the algorithm saw the word high and flagged it as positive sentiment.
Oh, okay.
But of course, any human reading it understood the actual meaning was negative. He thought his own stock was overvalued. And sure enough, the market reacted negatively with a big measurable drop in returns, despite the positive computational score.
So human irony, or maybe just genuine opinion, it overrides the simple algorithm definition.
It proves that context and human understanding are still key. Yeah.
And just as a counterpoint, to show this effect isn't like all-powerful across the entire market, the sources did note that for really huge established companies, like Amazon, for example,
Right.
there was no significant CR, positive or negative, that could be attributed just to his tweets about them.
Yeah, market size seems to provide some resistance. Scale matters when you're trying to push against the Musk effect. It works best on perhaps more volatile assets or stocks where he has a direct connection. Hashtag outro.
Okay, so wrapping this up, We've seen this real duality throughout our deep dive today, haven't we?
Absolutely. On the one hand, you have this undeniable economic engine, the Musk empire, generating immense wealth, injecting hundreds of billions into U.S. communities, driving high-wage manufacturing.
A genuine economic force.
No question. And yet, it's also a system that was fundamentally shaped, supported, even rescued at critical moments by government policy and a massive public sector investment.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars.
That pension, yeah. Between the sort of iconic private capitalist image and the reality of public benefit and reliance on public funds, that really feels like the core takeaway.
I think so.
So maybe the final thought to leave with you, the listener, is this. Given that this huge economic force providing jobs, driving innovation, things we generally see as good, was so crucially enabled by taxpayer dollars and continues to rely on these massive, often sole-source government contracts, especially for things like space launch, does the public, or should the public, have maybe more regulatory oversight? Or perhaps more, say, more control over the individuals leading these companies?
Especially when they're personal decisions, sometimes made almost instantly.
Like a single tweet, or deciding not to provide Starlink somewhere.
Exactly. When those decisions can carry such enormous national and economic consequences for everyone else.
It's a tough question. Definitely something to chew on as you process all these data points we've discussed.
Indeed. A lot to think about. We'll be back next time for another deep dive.